The case of the disappearing letter N. Why do all these other languages keep losing their letters? First there was French, where you don't pronounce consonants on the end, except sometimes you do. Now they tell me there's something amiss with the letter N in the word un in Irish. Why can't they all just learn from English? Oh wait, English has silent letters too. A fair few, actually, rather a lot. There they are, written on the page but not pronounced at all. The English language certainly can't point the finger at anyone else about that. It's not quite the same thing though, because the Irish N I'm talking about only disappears sometimes. So what's this about? Un only has 2 letters and one of them drops out sometimes. Guess which? The A can go too, but that's another story. Such a little word. Surely nobody will miss that letter. Why do we have to spend important time investigating it? Since un means the, we might find we have to use it a fair bit. In fact, there are all sorts of ways this little word un is pronounced in Irish, and as learners we can struggle to get on top of them, let alone to use them correctly in a sentence as we're making up speech. It's a lot to keep a rule in your mind. As you talk, you might fall back on old habits learned from looking at the word rather than from listening. In our investigation, we're going to look at clues and evidence. We'll find out who done it, or maybe who didn't do it, and see if others have solved the mystery somewhere, out there on the internet maybe, or even in books. What are the clues we can find today? Well, there are clues from hearing native speech. For me, that's mostly been through watching programs on television, but also using Buntús Cainte, which is primarily an audiolingual method of learning Irish. And you find many examples there. Let's look at a couple of sentences where we can see the difference here. Tá doras an seo. The door is here. Tá doras an seo. Now there you can hear the N when I speak. But if I'm at the door, it's tá me agadoras. Tá me agadoras. Tá me agadoras. So the N becomes a. 2 different ways of saying it there, but why? In the second sentence, that N really does disappear, as if I was saying tá me agadoras. You can probably find many other examples. The term used for the postman, fer fust, or the post office, ifig fust. You want to say when you see it written, ifig an fust, but in fact what you hear very frequently is ifig fust. Interestingly, in the online dictionary Changlan, the Ulster variant given there, they have 3 different speakers giving you the pronunciation of a word, actually does pronounce the N and say ifig an fust, even quite differently from how I said it then, but certainly with the N in there. You can also hear it in phrases from Buntús Cainte and elsewhere, such as the one for upstairs, huas a staire. You certainly hear that the N drops out there. But then again, there's a phrase like Faran Frock Wan. Faran Frock Wan. The man in the white coat who is the bogeyman, or perhaps the one who took the missing N. But here all the speakers, Ulster, Connacht and Munster speakers in the recordings do pronounce the N. It's hard to see what the rule is. You do find discussions of this issue online if you want more evidence that it is an issue, on various discussion boards, which I'll put the links for below. Some of the explanations there are better than others, but the issue is also raised by AnLoingseach in his half-hour video on the Definite article on YouTube, which is really worth a listen if you have that sort of time. But I'm going to home in on something he says, which is that the N is usually dropped before consonants in speech if the word before it ends in a consonant. The N is usually dropped before consonants in speech if the word before the N ends in a consonant. Notice he says usually. We'll come back to that. He also goes on to explain that when the N is pronounced, it, quote, assimilates to the following consonant, which is mentioned elsewhere, but that's a whole other case to investigate and solve. Let's come back to that word usually, with this disappearing N in un. Does that mean it's not always the case, as we saw with the bogeyman, the man in the white coat? Is it wrong to sound the N in un after a consonant. I confess I had noticed this missing N after much listening and repeating with Buntús Cainte. That doesn't stop me though forgetting sometimes when I'm actually trying to speak and slipping it back in as if my mind's eye were looking at the word and thinking, but it's spelt A-N. It's not as if I hadn't seen the evidence elsewhere too. If we look in the book Learning Irish by Michéal, it's slipped in there first in lesson 5 in a very brief note on the definite article. I'll read the sentence. It says, very succinctly, the N is not pronounced when the article occurs between consonants. Okay, this is sounding very similar, except he doesn't say usually, he just says it is not pronounced. Note that his book is speaking about and in a particular dialect. Maybe it's a dialect thing? Please let me know if you know more about this, as I find these little things really interesting. In Michéal, the 2 sentences he gives there are good examples. Tá fearan sin. Tá fearan sin. Here we say the N because the tá that comes before un ends in a vowel. So we do say the N in un. The man is there. Tá fearan sin. The second sentence, Níl a gasar an seo. Níl a gasar an seo. Níl a gasar an seo. Now I'm separating the words out there artificially so you can hear what I mean. We drop the N because it's between consonants, which is the L, níl, that slender L on the end of níl, and the G on the beginning of gasur. Because the un comes between, it becomes níl a gasur rather than un. Going back to Buntús Cainte though, in lesson 38 there are many example sentences where the N in un is clearly pronounced right down to the bottom of the page there, between 2 consonants, in the recordings that accompany the book. So we have a contradiction there. For me, what this all leads to is the usefulness of using more than one learning resource when you study Irish. So from Buntús Cainte I could hear that this is being dropped, though not always, but I couldn't necessarily figure out what the rule was. Presumably, if you listen to a sufficient amount and just learn to repeat from that, you might not need to know the rule, you just get used to the idea. But sometimes it also helps to have that explicit rule. Michéal's book also has sound files of native speakers, so you can hear it there as well. It's just not as heavily based on the kind of audio-lingual method. The thing is, knowing an explicit rule doesn't mean you always remember to implement it when you actually speak. You also need to remember, if you learn it by hearing, that you must put the N there when you write. Otherwise it'll get mixed up with another word. Part of the usefulness for me in this is learning to understand when I hear people that, okay, it's not a different word, it actually is un that they're saying, it just happens to be missing its N. I still haven't discovered whether that is usually or always. As I say, if you know more about this, please share. And please subscribe too, so we can continue this conversation, because now that I come to think about it, there's also in the word egg the case of the missing G. And numerous other mysteries in the Irish language. Stay tuned for further episodes, and in the meantime, check out some of my other videos.